This is something that Tomi Melka and I have been working on, and I'm going to give you the briefest of overviews here because this is toward a comprehensive grapholinguistic analysis of the Rongorongo phenomena of Rapa Nui regarding the core and extended corpus. And this is a huge issue among Rapa Nui, our Rongorongo researchers, as to exactly what is the core. And you've already seen this, so I'm going to skip through this, but this was the first tablet that was found. I'm not going to talk a lot about Rongorongo right now, the phenomenon, but it's a very interesting phenomenon. And I think it sheds a lot of light both on the mental workings of humans and the nature of language. And part of the problem is that we don't have a very large corpus, as I've stressed before. We don't actually know what language the script was in, presumably some kind of ancient Polynesian-based language of Rapa Nui. We don't really know what the genres are, probably ritualistic formulas based on ethnographic work, list-like enumerations, and probably histories, other types of things. So we have a huge issues with this. And I could talk at length about that, but I obviously don't have time now given the constraints we're under. This I introduced already are the three basic monographs on Rongorongo, and you've already seen this. So these are just to refresh your memory. Some of the classic tablets. Pay attention to text Y up in the upper left-hand corner. This is a I showed you a gorget before. This is a Ria, but Ria Miro, which means a gorget basically made out of wood, versus the one I showed you before with shell. This also has, depending on how you count it, two glyphs on it. This is one of the classic parts. Barthel, as I mentioned, was the first to really monograph Rongorongo. He recognized 24 legitimate Rongorongo inscriptions. He assigned the letters A through X of them, and then that Paris snuff box became his Y in an article in 1963. It was discovered in 1961 or came to light in 1961 from a family whose ancestor had collected. His monograph had been published in 1958. Fisher in 1997 recognized those 25 objects. He did not use Barthel's lettering system. He assigned them numbers, and he didn't assign the numbers in the same order. Most people do not use Fisher's um, form. They use the original Barthel coding. And then recently, Horley in 2021 produced what is really the latest monograph on Rongorongo. He recognizes 27 Rongorongo objects or inscriptions as authentic. He numbers them A through Z, and then to start over again, uses the number sign A. And again, he uses A through X, X and Y, A through X and Y, A through Y are the Barthel coding. His Z is not an object that we have anymore to study. He bases it, it's known as the Annapolis bird. He bases it on these two museum cards from an object that is lost. And if you look at these rubbings, that does seem to be that it had a Rongorongo on it. Gordon already mentioned the specimen. The claim has been that it may have been collected as 1845. When I analyze this and dig into the records, I'm not convinced that it's 1845. It may have been well into the late 19th century. This museum card is from from 1941, close to 100 years later again. This is his number 27 object, which he labels number A. And this is something that Fisher had actually mentioned briefly. And I use this is an example of how controversial what an inscription even is, because Fisher mentioned this. He pointed out that it's known as a moe papa. It's a female figure from Easter Island, and it bears two fused glyphs on its head, on its crown, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. This is from Horley. And Fisher wrote, because this involves two separate glyphs, though fused, it satisfies the It satisfies the definition of a Rongorongo inscription and should therefore be regarded as an authentic Rongorongo text. And I can't help, and I don't mean to sound the wrong way, but I can't help but laugh, because here's Fisher in his monograph saying it's a Rongorongo text, it's a Rongorongo inscription, yet he did not include it as a Rongorongo inscription in his primary catalog or discussion. These are recently published potential Rongorongo objects. I'm being very careful here. These were all published by Tomi, Melka, and myself. I'll run through them quickly. This is a Rangitoki barkcloth fragment, which was collected in 1869 and is the only known example that we have at this point, and have studied extensively. I'm absolutely convinced it's authentic, despite what some people have tried to say. And it's an inscription on barkcloth. Now, of course, barkcloth is even more fragile than wood, so even less ability for it to be preserved. But this has actually a very good provenance. It came from the family, was descended through the family, and the original collector rolled it up. It's very small, rolled it up and put it in this watch case and wrote a note about how he collected it. It was actually given to him by a female Rapa Nui who went by Rangitoki, which may be a nickname, in March of 1869. This is before any Europeans were aware, generally scholars were aware of Rongorongo. So this is one of the earliest collected specimens, just a 19th and then 18th century depictions of Rapa Nui women, just to give a sense of it. This is a specimen known as the San Diego tablet that we've described. It was found in a San Diego estate by an antiques and junk dealer who's out of Prescott, Arizona himself. And when you look at it, yes, it's somewhat crude, but it's not a Slavish copy. It's not a copy at all. Gordon, who just spoke, Berthen, has actually analyzed it and come to the conclusion, as Tomi, Melka, and I have, that this is a genuine Rongorongo tablet and inscription. Maybe very late, maybe from the 1860s, that would be my guess, but should be part of the corpus as far as I am concerned personally. I'll speak for myself. This is the top slide. The top photograph shows the inscription. The underside, or the bottom, the other side of it, maybe it had inscription once, or maybe it didn't. The whole tablet, when you hold it, is very, very light, very weathered, very eroded. And I suspect what happened, and this is well documented with these tablets, is that it was secreted away in a cave on Rapa Nui. This is a cave in Rapa Nui. I've been there numerous times. And you have these caves, and this is actually in one of the caves. And what you would have is that these tablets would be wrapped up in these moist, damp caves, and they would frankly rot away. And this type of surface that you see on the bottom is exactly what you would expect and get. This is the Kell hand, known as the Kell hand, after the collector who collected in November 1868, again, before people were even, when I say people, Westerners were looking for Rapa Nui, looking for Rongorongo inscriptions. Not a situation where the Rapa Nui at that point were making them, or as trade items, as far as we can determine. And on the Kell hand is this. This is, in fact, and again, Tomi and I have analyzed it carefully. This, in fact, is a short Rongo inscription on the Kell hand. A little bit crude, etc., but it's there nonetheless. This is another specimen that was collected, and you already saw this in Gordon's talk, in November 1868. This too has a short Rongorongo inscription on it. So those 4 items, I am of the opinion, really need to be added to the corpus. But there are other objects, there are others that have inscriptions of the Rongorongo phenomenon. And I have to do this quickly now, but I want to point out that people like Fisher, I'm going to quote him here. He says, because the other scripts do not comprise longer sequences of glyphs and are devoid of any traditional context, they will be of little or no assistance in the epigraphic translation of the Rongorongo script. And we disagree with this very strongly. Even when you just have one glyph, if you have it in a context, ethnographic or anthropological context, that can start to help, in my assessment, shed light on what this script is all about, how to decipher, how to decode it. So just to give you a few examples, this is known as the Lutz Terasaki fragment, which we have, Tomi, Melka and I have written about. This is an engraving tool with a glyph on it. This has this actually quite rare glyph or compound on it. This is a graving tool with a well-known glyph. Both of these are from the 19th century. This was collected probably no later than the mid-19th century. And then you have other objects. This reportedly was collected by the second Cook expedition of 1774, seemed to have a Rongorongo-ish like glyph, a hollow belly frigate bird on it. This is a specimen that was collected in 1816. Like that first tablet that was found, this has hair wrapped around it, braided hair wrapped around that. That was the primary purpose of it. It's essentially a hair amulet. And when you look at it, it's got one is the face, but four Rongorongo glyphs on the top of it. This is another object that was collected in 1816 with a well-known Rongorongo glyph on it. This is another 1816 collection with basically a bird and crescent, but these are known Rongorongo glyphs. And then when you start looking at things like skulls and bones, I only mentioned this is a paper by Osley et al., and they point out, I'm going to quote here, not as well studied, however, are embellished human bones from Rapa Nui, particularly crania with incised or painted designs. And it turns out that when you start looking at private collections, there are a number of these bones that are known, and I've been collecting photographs of them, that contain Rongorongo-like motifs, other iconography on them, and they've not been documented before. This is something that we're working on. This is known as Maki Maki, the face of Maki Maki. If you look here, this little like a garland type thing, that's known from the Rongorongo. You look at this, these were collected in 1843. A number were collected apparently in 1843 when the whaler, the Margaret Rate, paid a visit to Easter Island. I'm going to flip through these, and you can see how these compare to Rongorongo. This is known as Tahunga. Here's another object with inscriptions. This is classic. Well, when I say classic, these are Rongorongo. This was collected in 1868. This is in there in 1843, a skull with these symbols, these signs on it. This was another one with Rongorongo inscriptions. This was collected in the late 19th, early 20th century. We don't have a lot of, unfortunately, provenance for it, but it does seem to be authentic when we analyze it. And it's interesting. It's a very similar to what this piece in 1843. And again, these are known as Rongorongo. These are known Rongorongo glyphs. This is a little metacarpal that has a Rongorongo inscription on it. And it was known that, or believed that Rongorongo was tattooed on people. In fact, this is as gruesome as some people might think of it. This is a little specimen of human skin that was collected in 1816, and it's very faint, but it has, in fact, Rongorongo tattooed on it. This is from a bark cloth figure. Actually, these are two different specimens from bark cloth figures, from a finger and a limb of a bark cloth. If you're not familiar with bark cloth figures, it's maybe a little difficult to see what you're looking at. But the point here is that they, in fact, include what appears to be a elaborate form of a Rongorongo glyphs. When you've heard about this already on the headdresses, we'll call them that, the pukayo of Moai, Gordon mentioned this. You have Rongorongo glyphs, you have petroglyphs with Rongorongo, and we then have, of course, the modern tourist items with Rongorongo. That's something we have to exclude. People argue about authenticity. I just want to point out some people questioned the authenticity of the Rangitoki bark cloth, and they say, oh, well, they make them nowadays. No, the bark cloth that they do nowadays with Rongorongo inscriptions, those are just copies from the known corpus. They copy it right out of Fisher or Barthel. And if you notice, the modern bark cloth is nothing like the ancient bark cloth. In fact, we have a piece of bark cloth that may have been collected as early as 1770 with a Rongorongo, sometimes it's referred to as a sun glyph, and the quality of this glyph, the style of painting, et cetera, matches the Rangitoki glyph. In the 19th century, this is from 1887, a novel, people got interested in the Rongorongo, but they weren't trying to dupe anyone. You get into issues of authenticity, though, with ethnographic specimens like this, were some of them manufactured to deceive. So this, I hate even talking about in some ways, but this is a so-called Rongorongo tablet that was published in 2011 in this publication, and it later got auctioned, and I don't know what it sold for ultimately, but it had an estimate of 80,000 to 104,000 euros, which I would point out is probably, it's really weird because on the one hand, it's not cheap, but on the other hand, if it really were an authentic Rongorongo tablet, I would expect it to go for a lot more than 100,000 euros. So it's one of those weird things, but when you start looking at it, and Fedorova looked at it actually before it was even auctioned, but it was in Russian. This is some pictures of the tablet, and this is showing it. The Rongorongo inscription really does not look right. And when she analyzed it, sure enough, it's just a hodgepodge, if you would, of some lines from various known tablets copied right out of the literature. And when you look at, this is my analysis, you see that parts of it, there's no inscriptions where it's all worm-eaten and whatnot. And I think what they were doing was they took a 200-plus-year-old piece of wood, because it was radiocarbon dated, to sort of try to authenticate it. And then they added that. They also, I think, burnt on that purposefully to give it the concept of age. So that's a very quick overview. I don't know that we have time even for questions because we have to end now, but just to give you a sense of where we're coming from. And the important point is that we are finding, when I say we, Tomi, Melka, and myself, we're finding that there's more to the Rongorongo phenomenon than what has been sort of institutionalized in academia as just, 24 to 27, quote, corpus of inscriptions. So thank you very much. And we'll end here.